Welcome to the very important Physicians and Kids presentation on community and systems advocacy brought to you by the Coordinating Center and our partners, the Parents Place of Maryland and Public Policy Partners. For those of you who are unfamiliar with VIP Physicians and Kids, we are a patient-centered medical home program at the Coordinating Center, funded by the Maryland Department of Health's Office for Genetics and People with Special Healthcare Needs and the Maryland Community Health Resources Commission. We partner with pediatric practices in Maryland to coordinate care for children and youth with special healthcare needs. Providing effective care coordination can be challenging and complex, especially for children and youth with special healthcare needs who receive care from numerous providers and systems. That is why we partner with providers, the patient, and their family to deliver a collaborative self-management care coordination model. Participants can expect our experienced community health workers and RN care coordinators to help them address barriers in care, develop a shared care plan, and find resources that best fit your family's needs. This presentation will prepare families for current and future advocacy needs. Our objectives are to provide you with an understanding of the different types of advocacy and the impact it can have on your child and community, and an advocacy framework with tips and tools for building effective systems of care for your child and other children and youth with special healthcare needs in the community. First, you will hear from Renee Everett-Sanzone, the Executive Director of the Parents Place of Maryland, who will talk about community advocacy versus systems advocacy, followed by some tips for families who plan to serve on advocacy groups and/or committees or boards of mission-driven organizations. Then you will hear from Robin Elliott, a partner with Public Policy Partners, who has over 15 years of experience in legislation, the state budget process, and healthcare finance.
Hello, this is Renee Everett-Sanzone with the Parents Place of Maryland, and we're going to talk about how being an empowered parent of a child with a special health care need, and you know, we talked about advocacy for your child, teaching your child self-advocacy. Well, today we're going to talk about advocacy in how we make change, or how we affect change, right? And it's because of that lived experience of being a parent and a caregiver. It really is important that we are some of the strongest advocates as parents and caregivers. But it's really important for us, and we're asked a lot to share our opinions, share our stories, share our thoughts. But it's really important, and while that's very important, it's also really important to learn the skills to be able to serve. And how do we serve effectively so that we're making a difference for not only our child, but other children and youth with special health care needs. And so there's kind of two buckets of advocacy opportunities that aren't at that individual level of our child, right? So you can look at the bucket where it says community advocacy, your personal community. So looking at how do you make a difference in your local community level, but making sure you're defining what your community is, right? So do you live in a town? Do you live in a bigger city? You know, is it more rural, urban? What does that look like? And but it's important to get active at that local level. You know, because that's where you live, that's where your child is a part of that community. Some examples, you could look at joining a local transition council, a local care team, a local disability agency board, or an advisory committee that are more local, that are part of your community. So that's one bucket of opportunities of where you may want to think about seeing how you can serve and practice your skills. The other bucket is what we call systems advocacy, or a policy level, and it's a policy and or where the money is, the money resources, right? And this can look a lot of different ways. It could be state or federal at a legislative level, a legislative system, excuse me, or it could be active at a systems level. So it doesn't necessarily have to be legislative. It could be a statewide advisory group or a statewide committee. And here are some examples. It could be a consumer group that looks at improving policies. It can be a commission that advises a state agency. It could be a council that advises an organization or a nonprofit board. So these are all just examples of those different types of systems advocacy. And you really, one form of that system advocacy is looking about how can you get support for increased funding for programs and services. Programs and services, they're usually, not always, but usually underfunded. So there's always a need for those additional resources. You could look at how, testifying before the General Assembly on a particular issue of interest, but it could also be testifying at a local level, like a local county commissioner or a city council. And part of that systems advocacy is developing relationships with the elected officials, your representatives. And again, that can still be at the local level, but it also could be at the state level, and it could be at the also at the federal level. So we've defined two different buckets of big buckets of advocacy type opportunity. So community advocacy and systems advocacy. But so now we've defined the buckets and we've given some examples, but we really want to talk about serving on groups, right? And so one of the first steps that you need to look at with that is, really part of serving on group is how to take your passion and knowledge and really make it an incredible powerhouse for change. And you do that by serving. And so, we are the advocates from the moment we learn about our child's special health care need. And there are many demands on our time and many asks for our voices. And sometimes weeding through all of that can be really, really overwhelming. So we're going to just, I'm going to share some thoughts, food for thoughts about some of your next steps. And part of that, like we said before, was serving on groups. And it can look really very, very, very different because there are a lot of different types of groups. There are boards for nonprofits. There are task force. There are committees, advisory groups, work groups, evaluation groups, and many more. Probably more than you probably could list a bunch. The list does go on and on and on. But it's that piece of when I mentioned before about, we're the advocates, right? Because we have that lived experience. But we really have to, so that's our passion, right? And then we have to, and we have the knowledge of, our own child, our own child's needs, and then we have acquired knowledge of what are the issues, right? What are the issues that concerns us, or where are the holes, or where are the needs? And we put those two together, and then that's where we figure out that's where we can, by marrying the two together, that's how we look at making a change. And then which of these various types of group is it the best fit for us for the change that we want to see happen? But it's really important to kind of know where do we need to fit, because as we said, the list for the various types of groups can go on and on. So before you start any advocacy effort, you really do need to ask yourself some very, very important questions. One, do you have the time? Seriously, we must ask ourselves this question. And in the next slide, we'll go over a tool that might be helpful to answer this question. So many times we as family members care so deeply and we want to make things better for all families. We tend to say yes when maybe we should say no. Second, if you do have the time, right, now you need to prioritize which group and which request is the most important to you and your passion with that. And then last but not least, you definitely need to learn the skills needed to serve on a group so that our participation has the biggest impact to truly affect change and make things better for families. It isn't enough just to be the family member and have passion, which those are incredibly important. It is the fire in the belly that drives us. It is the lived experience that probably no one or very few sitting around the table bring. But the skills just help us to harness all that passion and all of that power. So in the slide before, we asked the very first question, do you have time? And I, not meaning to be funny at all, but sometimes it is hard to realize, to answer this question. So this graph here, graph tool, is just a very handy way that we have found when we are working with families around teaching them the skills to serve on groups. This is a really handy way of answering the questions. And then after this, it will help you to answer the next question is, which of the groups do you prioritize? And as you can see here, there are vertical arrows that show at the top high time and low time, and then the horizontal shows high energy and low energy. What we say a lot of times is just, I would simply go old school. Grab a piece of paper and draw these two lines. And then think about everything you are currently doing with groups, as well as all of the other things going on in your life, but think about it, right? Now take one by one each one of these groups and think about, do they require a great deal of time or very little? Is it requiring a lot of your energy to be on it with tasks and events? Or is it very little of your energy? And then ask yourself these questions for every group you are involved with, including those groups that aren't related to special health care needs or disabilities. And for each group, write them down in the area that they fall or the quadrant that they fall. So if it is a group that is high time and high energy, you're going to be in that top right corner. But if it's a lot of energy, but it doesn't take much of your time, it's in the bottom right. So forth and so on as you are going through each one of the groups that you are serving on. And then once you have finished, look at this chart, right? This should let you know pretty quickly, do you have the time? If yes, then you say yes. And if not, and the request to join a group is something that is really important to you, then maybe you look at what you are currently doing and adjust. Maybe you give something up or you shift something. But this is just a really nice way of doing a visual representation of all of the work that you are doing related to your advocacy work. A lot of times what we find when we do this is a lot of our groups that we serve on end up in that far right corner. And so, then you have to make some difficult decisions. So it is one thing to be passionate about making a difference and getting involved, and it's admirable. And we definitely need the family voice. We're the ones using the service, so we should be at the table to make sure our voice and the voices of others that are heard. But we really do need to learn the skills so that we are really making sure that that all of our passion is really moving towards a change that makes things better for all families and children with special health care needs. So like we talked about in the beginning, is there are different types of groups. So we have to figure out, we talked about, do you have time, and then prioritizing it, and now we're talking about learning the skills. So there are different types of groups. So you need to figure out which group is the best fit for you with your time, your passion, the issues, the concerns, the needs that you see with that. And then we want to, so again, is this a committee, an ad hoc, a task force, a board, an evaluation group, a data group? And then ask ourselves, what is the functions of the group? So how often does the group meet? How are they, is this a governing group? Is this an advisory group? Is this a feedback group? How is it run? Is it run by consensus, or is it run very formally, like Robert's Rules of Orders? And then telling your story. This is a real balancing act. Our story is always important, but when you are serving a group, our story is about moving the work forward or the issue forward to make a change. And it should be used to lift up all family voices who are experiencing the same issue or dilemma. It isn't about only our own situation. So really telling our story in a really impactful way is a very useful skill to learn. And then last, but definitely not least, is data and understanding data. When we do this work, emotions are important because it is the passion, and we've talked a lot about that, and it's the heart of the work. But decisions need to be based on data or data decision making. So it's important to understand data, and not only understand it, but what data is needed or what data is missing. Sometimes that can tell us a lot. And where do we need to go to get the data, and from whom do we need to get the data from? And really understanding the richness of all of the data with those pieces. But this just scratches the surface about the skills you need to effectively serve on groups.
Hello, my name is Robin Elliott. I'm very excited to be with you today because I am a systems advocate. And it is really important for my work to work with families and individuals just like you. You make the difference. Systems advocacy at the core is about translating personal experience to system-wide change, whether that is within a neighborhood, a city, a county, a state, or even on a national level. So I'm very pleased that you're joining us today. You can do systems advocacy in really 6 steps that we're going to talk about today. I wanted to let you know that I have really seen countless times individuals make a difference. I know this sounds cliche, but it's really true. And I'm going to share just one example with you. I worked with a young man who, as an adolescent, was experiencing many health issues that his education system didn't pay for, so he needed his insurance for his occupational therapy, his speech therapy, and his physical therapy. But insurance coverage didn't work very well, and he was very frustrated, and he saw how it affected him. So when he was a little bit older, he went and talked to legislators, other advocacy groups, individual advocates like himself, and in the end, he inspired a groundbreaking bill which has improved insurance coverage for everyone in Maryland. That advocate is now a paid advocate in Washington, D.C. So advocacy can be a path as a volunteer, or it can be potentially a career. Whatever your pathway, I'm glad you're here today. The first things you'll want to do is select an issue and prioritize. This sounds simple, but I know it's not. From personal experience, there's so many things that you want to change in this world, but we don't have time, or at least I know I don't. So select one or two and then start thinking about what are the solutions. These solutions can come from your personal experience. They can come from recommendations of other organizations or all of the above. But at the core, ground everything with your personal story. In the end, it's your personal experience that is really going to make a difference in your advocacy journey. Step 2, you may want to think about teaming up with an organization. Organizations have more resources than many of us as individuals, and they can really help move the needle on a policy issue. First, of course, you want to make sure that that organization aligns with your mission and your vision. You also probably want to look at, are they open to consumer participation? There are ways to tell. Does that organization have a newsletter which talks about individuals advocating? Does it have a policy committee? Events that can be participatory that feature policy issues? You can check it out. You can join a newsletter or attend an event or volunteer. You don't have to decide all at once. You can look at an organization and decide as you go along if it's the right fit. And of course, identifying the decision makers. These are your state officials, your county officials, even your legislators. If you live in Maryland and you need to know who your legislators are, you can go on the website right on the screen, www.mdelect.net. Type it in, type your address, and you'll get the whole list. Finding those legislators and then determining where they are in the issues that matter to you. You can research them, you can look at their website, you can look at other organizations. And then the other thing I would suggest is find out a little bit about them personally. Sometimes those personal connections are really what matters the most. Do you share a school? Do you share a gym? Do you go to the same grocery store? Do you have some mutual friends? All of these things are important. And then find an opportunity to connect to that legislator. It could be in person or virtually. There are many opportunities. There are town halls. Many legislators also enjoy one-on-one meetings with their constituents. And then think a little bit about the legislative process. This doesn't mean that you have to be an expert, especially starting out. It is definitely learn as you go. There are two core processes, whether you're working on a local level, a state level, even a national level. You have a budget process, sometimes called an appropriations process, and then a policy or bill process. Each of these processes have separate committees that make those decisions. So just like you're going to find out a little bit about your own legislator from your district, find out a little bit about the people in charge of those committees. What makes them tick? What are their stances? Step 5, communicating your views. This can be challenging, especially when you first start off. Know going in that you seldom have a long period of time to meet with an official or a legislator. So being organized and even practicing ahead helps. We have a couple tips for you. Start off by identifying yourself. And if it's a legislator, identify your neighborhood or somehow indicate to them that you are a voter, you are a constituent. Always state your purpose. You want to state that right up front so they know what to expect and what to listen for. Also know going in that they may not be an expert in this issue. Legislators, such as in Maryland, sometimes deal with 2,500 bills a year. There's no way they can understand all the ins and outs. They really rely on others to share their expertise. Always weave in your personal story. This is really the cement, the glue, the thing that people remember when they leave a meeting. Facts and figures are important, but that personal story really will motivate them to change the system. Know that you might have to be very brief. Of course, always thank them at the end. They will thank you. Everyone's time is valuable. And probably the most important thing is to create an opportunity for follow-up. Advocacy is seldom done in one meeting. It is over time. So whether it is that you're going to get back to them with more information, you're going to let them know about what happened at a community meeting, or even setting up a follow-up meeting. Whatever it is, create that second opportunity, that third opportunity to interact with them. A couple suggestions, especially if you live in Maryland. The organizations that I've featured on this slide here, the Coordinating Center, the Parents' Place, all very active in Maryland. If these organizations are the right fit, they may be the organizations you want to team up with in your advocacy journey. Follow them on social media, join their mailing lists, send them your stories. And I wanted to flag one of the best, most exciting advocacy events all year in Annapolis, and that is the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Day. This has been time and time again one of the most effective advocacy events I've ever seen. It has moved bills to the finish line repeatedly. So it's a really exciting way to start off your advocacy journey. And no matter what path you take, I hope our paths cross one day. Thank you.